I had just finished tightening the last screw on the hinge. I stood up, tested the door once, and it swung shut smooth and quiet, the way a door is supposed to when it has finally been done right. I tapped the edge of the frame with my knuckle, turned around and grinned at her. I fix your plumbing. I fix your shelves. Now I'm fixing bedroom doors too. Might as well marry me, Bryn. Save us both the trouble. I said it as a joke. I was laughing when I said it. The kind of laugh a man uses when he is saying something true and does not want to admit it. So he wraps it in humor the way you wrap a fragile thing in cloth, so it will not break on the way to wherever it is going. Bryn was not laughing. She looked at me with those warm brown gold eyes, the ones that always seemed to be reading something I had not written yet, and the seconds stretched. 1, 2, longer than a second or two has any right to feel. Then she stepped forward, took my hand, her green fingers wrapping around my wrist with a grip that was warm and certain and left no room for questions, and led me through the doorway I had just finished repairing into the room beyond it. Without a word, I stood there in the middle of her bedroom, my tool belt still hanging off my hip, a screwdriver in my back pocket, and I had no idea what was happening. Since when had it become like this? I honestly could not tell you the exact moment, only that somewhere between all those small repairs, the fence posts and the leaking pipes and the shelf brackets and the 100 other things I had fixed in her house over the past 9 months, it had. Before we go any further, if you believe that sometimes the person you are looking for has been standing right next to you the whole time, waiting for you to look up, subscribe to ORC Tears, then leave a like and drop a comment. What happens in this room is the reason this story exists. My name is Finn Alcott. I am 34 years old, and I fix things for a living. Roofs, floors, plumbing, doors, anything that needs a pair of hands willing to get dirty and a mind that does not panic when something looks worse once you open it up than it did before you started. I work with wood and stone and metal, and the particular patient understanding that broken things can almost always be made functional again, if you are willing to look at them long enough to understand where the break actually is, which is not always where it appears to be. It is not the life I pictured for myself. When I was younger, I had ideas about something grander, a title, a business, a name that meant something in the settlements beyond the one I lived in. But I am good at what I do now, and there is a dignity in it that I did not expect, the dignity of a man who walks into a house where something is broken and walks out, leaving it fixed. Nobody sends for me unless they need me. Nobody keeps me longer than the job requires. I like it that way. I have come to depend on the quiet more than I ever expected to. I was married once. Her name was Margot. 5 years, no children, and if I had to sum the whole thing up in one sentence, I would say we got married because the timing was right, not because we were. Margot was ambitious in a way that never slowed down. She wanted me to be a slightly different version of myself, a version with sharper edges and bigger plans and the kind of drive that fills a room before the person enters it. She was not a bad woman. I want to be fair about that, even now. We just never pointed in the same direction. No matter how many years we spent pretending the compass would eventually agree with us, eventually the pretending wore out before the patience did, and we signed the papers on an ordinary morning in November. The divorce did not feel like an ending. It felt like a name being given to something that had been true for a long time, and that both of us had been too tired to say out loud. After the divorce, I rented a house on the edge of Harrow's Creek, one of those older frontier places with wood floors that creaked under every step, and a staircase that groaned on the third tread every morning like it was greeting me on my way down. It was not much to look at, but it had a small backyard with a fence line that caught the morning fog light that hit the kitchen window at exactly 7:30, like the house had its own clock. And rent. That did not make me think twice about saying yes. I fixed whatever broke in that house without bothering to tell the landlord, partly because it was faster than waiting on someone else to get around to it, partly because fixing things gave me something to do with my hands that did not require thinking too hard about anything else, which mattered more that year than I probably would have admitted to anyone who asked. I lived alone. I made my own coffee in the mornings, read or watched the fire in the evenings, took jobs when the work came in. I was not lonely, or I had convinced myself of that, long enough to believe it most days, which felt close enough to the truth that I did not push on it. 3 weeks after I moved in, I found out the back fence was shared with the house next door, an old arrangement that must have gone back decades before either property had changed hands. There was a gate in the fence warped and stuck. That connected the 2 yards. I planed it down, oiled the hinges, got it working smooth, and had a spare key cut for whoever lived on the other side. I walked the key over on a Saturday afternoon. I knocked. I waited. The woman who answered the door was ORC. That was the first thing I saw, because the world has trained everyone, including me, to see it first. Warm, olive green skin, the kind that catches afternoon light and turns it into something richer than the light itself. Dark hair pulled back in a loose knot, brown gold eyes that held the particular evaluating attention of a person who does not open their door expecting strangers and who is assessing in the first half-second whether this one is safe. She wore an oversized sweater with the sleeves pushed up past her elbows, and she looked at me standing on her doorstep holding out a key like it was some kind of offering, with an expression that was not unfriendly but was not yet friendly either. The expression of a woman who has learned to wait for more information before committing to a reaction. I explained myself, probably too fast the way you do when you're aware you might look strange. Shared fence, gate, spare key, thought you might need it. The words came out in a tumble that I would have been embarrassed about if I had been paying attention to how I sounded, which I was not because I was paying attention to her face and the particular quality of stillness in it, which was not the stillness of someone who was bored or impatient, but the stillness of someone who is listening very carefully and has decided that listening is more important than responding. She took the key, she held it in her green palm for a moment, looking at it. Then she opened a drawer beside the door, a shallow wooden drawer that held odds and ends, and she pulled out a small object. A bead. Glass, deep green, no larger than a fingertip, polished smooth. She threaded it onto the key ring and tied it there with a thin leather cord right in front of me, without asking if it was all right. "So you know which one is ours," she said. Her voice was low and warm and unhurried, with the particular cadence of a person who chooses words the way a carpenter chooses nails, carefully and with attention to what each one is holding together. She handed the key back to me. I looked at the green bead on the ring. I did not ask what it meant. She did not explain. I put the key in my pocket and walked home and hung it on the kitchen board, on the nail beside the house key and the shed key, and the green bead caught the light from the window every morning after that, small and bright and unexplained. I did not know, standing on her doorstep that Saturday, that the bead was not decorative. I would not learn what it meant for 9 months. And by the time I learned, I would understand that the woman who tied it to my key ring had been saying something to me from the very first moment, in a language I did not speak, and that she had waited, patient and quiet and steady, for me to learn to hear it. Her name was Bryn. She was 29. She had moved to Harrow's Creek 2 years before I arrived, and in those 2 years she had established the kind of presence that orc women establish in human settlements, which is to say, she existed in a space that was tolerated but not embraced, visible but not seen, acknowledged in the practical transactions of daily commerce, and invisible in the social fabric that those transactions were woven into. She bought her supplies at the general store, and the clerk served her without comment. She sold herbs at the Saturday market, and the customers who bought them did so with the quick, efficient interaction of people who want the product without the relationship. She walked the streets of Harrow's Creek in the particular way that orc women walk through human towns, with a posture that takes up exactly the amount of space she is entitled to, and not 1 inch more, because taking more invites the kind of attention that orc women in human towns have learned to avoid. She was my neighbor. The fence between us was 6 feet tall and made of cedar planks that I had planed and oiled myself, and for the first 3 weeks after I moved in, the fence was all we shared. Then the morning started. I do not remember which of us began it. One morning I was standing in the backyard with my coffee, looking at the fog, and I heard her on the other side of the fence, and the sound of her moving in her garden was not intrusive, but present, the way birdsong is present, a thing that fills the background without demanding the foreground. I said good morning. She said good morning back. The next day the same. The day after that, she was standing at the fence with a cup of something that was not coffee, a dark herbal brew that smelled of mountain pine, and something green and living, and I was standing on my side with my coffee. And we stood there for 15 minutes, without either of us saying anything that mattered, and without either of us wanting to leave. That was how it started. 15 minutes of morning every day across a cedar fence with different drinks in different cups from different worlds. She drank orc tea, I drank coffee. The steam from both cups rose into the morning fog and mixed, and the mixing was invisible and unremarkable and happened without either of us noticing. Which is, I think, how most important things begin. She showed me her garden through the gaps in the fence, orc herbs, varieties I had never seen, with names in the orc language that she taught me one at a time, the way you teach a child new words, patiently and with the expectation that they will be remembered. I learned that the tall purple one was called Denvar and was used for headaches, that the low, spreading green one was Orvis and was good for sleep, that the one with tiny white flowers that smelled like cold mountain air was called Lisane, and it meant something in the orc tradition that she did not translate and that I did not ask about, because some things are given at the speed they are meant to be given at, and rushing them is a form of disrespect. I showed her the fence, specifically the loose board on the south side that I had been meaning to fix. I fixed it one afternoon while she watched from her garden, and when I was done, she came to the repaired section and ran her fingers along the new wood, and, with a small tool she carried in her apron pocket, carved something into the surface. A symbol, angular, precise, the kind of mark that contains meaning, the way a word contains meaning, except this was not a word in any language I could read. "What's that?" I asked. "It means the repair will hold," she said. I accepted that, the way I accepted most things about Bryn in those early months, which was without pushing, because pushing was a thing I had done in my marriage, and it had produced nothing except the sound of two people grinding against each other until the friction wore them both smooth and featureless. But I noticed the symbols. She carved them into every piece of her house that I repaired. The fence board got one, the shelf bracket got one. The pipe fitting under her kitchen sink, which I replaced on a Tuesday afternoon in November, got a small mark on the wood beside it that I had to crouch down and squint to see. Each symbol was different, each one was precise, and each one was placed on the repaired thing with the particular ceremonial attention of a person performing a ritual rather than making a decoration. I did not ask what they meant. I knew they meant something. I knew that asking before she was ready to tell me would be the wrong kind of curiosity, the kind that takes rather than receives. So I waited, and the symbols accumulated, and her house piece by repaired piece began to fill with marks that I could not read, but that I could feel, the way you feel the meaning of a song in a language you do not speak, through the melody rather than the words. The first time I said the thing that would eventually change everything, I was fixing her washing basin. The drain was clogged. I was on my knees with my head under the counter, my hands full of corroded pipe fittings, and my mind full of nothing except the satisfying problem of making water go where it was supposed to go. And I said it without thinking, without looking up, without any awareness of what I was saying or what it might mean to the woman standing 3 feet behind me. "Might as well marry me, Bryn. Save us both the trouble." I laughed. The sound bounced off the underside of the counter and came back to me, slightly changed, the way sounds do when they hit something solid. And I went on working, and I did not look up, and because I did not look up, I did not see her face. If I had looked up, I would have seen that she was not laughing. I would have seen something in her brown gold eyes that was not amusement and not surprise, but something else entirely. Something that had been there for longer than I knew. Something that was patient and certain and waiting. The look of a woman who had already made a decision and was waiting for the man she had decided on to catch up to it. But I did not look up. I finished the drain. I wiped my hands. I said goodnight. I went home through the gate in the fence and hung my tool belt on the hook by the door and ate dinner alone in a kitchen where a green bead on a keyring caught the last of the evening light, and I did not think about what I had said, because I had said it as a joke, and jokes do not require thinking about. 9 months, I said it as a joke, for 9 months, and for 9 months, across a cedar fence, over morning coffee and ORC tea, through 100 small repairs and 100 small symbols carved into wood I had fixed with my own hands. The woman next door waited for me to stop laughing and start meaning it. ORC women, I would learn, are patient. They are patient the way stone is patient, not because they do not feel the weather, but because they have decided that the weather will not move them. Bryn waited for me with the same patience she brought to her garden, tending the space between us the way she tended her herbs, with daily attention and no urgency, knowing that the thing she was growing would arrive in its own season, and that forcing it would only damage the roots. She waited, and I, oblivious and comfortable and wrapped in the safe, easy fiction that I was just a neighbor doing small favors for the woman next door, did not see what was growing on the other side of the fence until the season had already changed, and the thing she had planted had grown so tall it was visible from both sides. One evening in the 4th month, I was repairing the latch on her kitchen window. It was a small job, 10 minutes, the kind of repair that I could have done in my sleep, and that I stretched to 20 minutes because 20 minutes in her kitchen was better than 10. She was making something at the stove, one of the ORC dishes she prepared every evening, the kitchen full of the deep green herbid smell that I had come to associate with the specific quality of her presence. I finished the latch. I tested it twice, which was once more than necessary. I wiped my hands on my trousers, and as I was putting my tools back in my belt, I noticed something I had not noticed before. She was standing at the stove with her back to the door. In every human house I had ever worked in, people stood facing the door. It was automatic, instinctive. The particular spatial awareness of a species that has spent its evolutionary history watching for threats from the direction they are most likely to arrive. You face the door. You watch the entrance. You keep the point of vulnerability in your line of sight. Bryn was facing away from it, completely. Her back to the door, her attention on the stove, her body arranged in the posture of a person who has decided that the room she is standing in contains no threats, and that watching the entrance is unnecessary. I filled it away the way I filed away everything about Bryn in the growing collection of observations that I did not yet have a framework for understanding. She stood with her back to the door. It meant something. I did not know what. But I knew it meant something because everything Bryn did meant something, and the meaning was always precise and always deliberate and always delivered in a language I was slowly learning to read. Weeks later, on a morning in the 5th month, I came downstairs and found her in my kitchen. She had come through the gate, let herself in with the spare key, the one with the green bead, and she was sitting at my table with a cup of ORC tea, her back to the door, reading a book she had brought from her house. She looked up when I came down the stairs. She did not explain herself. She did not apologize for being in my house uninvited at 7 in the morning. She simply looked up from her book and said, "Your tea water is almost ready," and went back to reading. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her, sitting in my kitchen with her back to the door, and her tea on my table and her book in her green hands. And something shifted inside me that I did not have a name for yet. Not the shift of falling, the shift of arriving. The particular, quiet rearrangement of a man's internal furniture that happens when a person walks into a room he has been living in alone, and makes it look, for the first time, like a room someone is supposed to be living in. She was sitting with her back to the door, in my kitchen, which meant, in whatever language she was speaking with her body, that my house was a place where she felt safe. I made my coffee. I sat across from her. We drank in silence, her tea and my coffee, the two different scents mingling in the morning air of my kitchen the way they mingled every morning across the fence. Except this time, there was no fence between us, just a table and 2 cups, and the particular loaded silence of 2 people who are both aware that something has changed and who are both choosing for now to let the change speak for itself. The things Bryn did for me were not the things I did for her. I fixed physical objects, pipes, hinges, shelves, the concrete and measurable problems that tools can solve. She did something else entirely, something I did not have a name for because it operated in a language I had not learned to speak. She left food at my door. Not every day, often enough that it became a rhythm rather than a surprise. Small clay pots with lids, still warm, containing stews and broths and grain dishes prepared in the Orc tradition, with herbs and spices that I had never tasted in any human kitchen. The flavors were deep and layered, the kind of cooking that takes hours and attention, and the particular inherited knowledge that passes from mother to daughter through hands rather than recipes. I ate every meal she left. I washed the pots and set them on the fence post between our yards, and the next morning they were gone, and a day or two later they came back full again. She learned my coffee. I did not tell her how I took it. She watched, across the fence, during those 15-minute mornings. She watched me drink, and she learned the way Orc women learn things, through observation rather than interrogation. One morning I came downstairs and found a cup of coffee on the fence post on my side, made exactly right, sugar but no cream. The temperature perfect, which meant she had timed it to the minute I would walk out the door, which meant she had been counting my mornings, learning my rhythms, mapping the shape of my days without my knowing. I drank the coffee. It was perfect. I did not ask how she knew. She left things on my porch when it rained, a folded blanket on the bench where I sometimes sat in the evenings, placed there before the rain started, which meant she had read the sky the way her people read the sky, by scent and wind and the particular quality of light that precedes weather. And she had known the rain was coming before I did, and she had thought of me sitting on the bench, and she had decided that I should not be cold. Each of these gestures was small. Each one, taken alone, could be explained as neighborly kindness, the ordinary consideration of a person who lives next to another person and is decent enough to care about their comfort. I explained them that way. There was Partick and Ereddy, the British. The new arrow found their beyond Seacrest and to the northwest of the valley. Of the township, Partick is all right. The victims of Frass was still settled. For months, I explained them that way, because explaining them any other way would have required me to look at the thing that was growing between us and give it a name, and giving it a name meant risking it. And I had already lost one named thing in my life, and the loss had taught me to be careful about naming the next one. What I did not know, what I would not learn until the morning everything changed, was that each of these gestures was not random. They were sequential. They were part of a system, a ritual, ancient and specific, that Orc women had been performing for centuries. In the Orc tradition, a woman does not say, "I choose you," with words. She says it with her hands, with food prepared and delivered, with a home marked and tended, with mornings shared and rhythms learned, with a bead tied to a key, which is the first step, and with the slow, patient accumulation of every other step that follows, each one building on the last, each one carrying a specific meaning in a language that the person receiving it may or may not understand. The ritual has a name. In the Orc tongue, it is called the Vethlan, which translates roughly as the quiet choosing. It is not a proposal. It is not a courtship. It is a declaration, made entirely through action, that says, "I have chosen you. I am feeding you, sheltering you, marking your spaces, learning your rhythms. Every step of this process is my answer. The only thing remaining is for you to see it." Bryn had been performing the Vethlan for 9 months. Every meal left at my door, every symbol carved into my repairs, every cup of coffee timed to my morning, every blanket placed before the rain. She had completed nearly every step of the Orc choosing ritual, openly, in plain sight, in a language I could not read. And she had done it with the patience of a woman who understood that the man she had chosen did not speak her language, and who was willing to wait for him to learn. I did not learn, not from her, not from observation, not from the slow accumulation of evidence that should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. I learned from an old Orc merchant named Tavrik on a Tuesday morning in July, in the most accidentally devastating conversation of my life. I had gone to Tavrik's shop to buy hinges. He was an orc metal worker who ran a small forge on the east side of the settlement, one of the few orc businesses that human customers patronized regularly, because his hinges and his brackets and his fasteners were better than anything the human smith produced. And commerce, as always, is the first crack in the wall of prejudice. While Tavrik was wrapping my order, his eyes drifted to the key ring hanging from my belt loop, the key with the green bead. He stopped wrapping. He looked at the bead. He looked at me. Then he smiled. The slow, knowing smile of a man who has just seen something that he finds both amusing and significant. "Your neighbor gave you a gate bead," he said. "A what?" "A gate bead. Kapı, boncuğu." He pointed at the green glass on my key ring. An orc woman ties a bead to a man's key when she opens her gate to him. It means the gate is always open. But the deeper meaning, he paused, and the smile widened. The deeper meaning is, I have chosen you. I stared at the bead I had been carrying for 9 months, the bead I had hung on my kitchen board, and looked at every morning without once asking what it meant. "It is the first step of the Vethlan," Tavrik continued, enjoying this. "The quiet choosing, after the bead comes the feeding, the morning sharing, the home marking. Has she done those things as well?" My mouth opened, my mouth closed. Every meal left at my door, every cup of coffee, every symbol carved into the wood I had repaired. The blankets, the herbs, the mornings across the fence. The careful, patient, systematic accumulation of 9 months of gestures that I had categorized as neighborly kindness, and that were, in fact, the most comprehensive declaration of love I had ever received, delivered in a language I did not speak by a woman too patient to rush me and too proud to translate. "I didn't know," I said. Tavrik laughed, not cruelly, with the warm, deep-chested amusement of a man who has watched human-orc misunderstandings for decades and who finds them endlessly entertaining. "Of course you didn't know. You are human. You hear love in words. We say love with hands. She has been saying it with her hands for months. The only question is whether you heard it." "What's the last step?" I asked. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. "The last step is the man's. He makes a bead of his own and gives it to her. She threads both beads on the same cord and hangs it on the door. 2 beads, 1 cord, 1 threshold. That is the orc marriage." I left the shop with the hinges in my hand and the bead on my key ring and the particular devastating awareness of a man who has just discovered that the thing he was looking for was not across the world or around the corner or in the future. It was next door. It had been next door for 9 months, and it had been telling him so every single day in a language he was too blind to read, with a patience that he did not deserve and that he was now desperate to be worthy of. If you feel what just hit this man in a hardware shop on a Tuesday morning, subscribe to Orc Tears right now and leave a like. What he does next will determine everything. I did not go to Bryn's house. Not yet. I went home. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the keyboard where the green bead had been catching the morning light for 9 months, and I thought about every breakfast she had left at my door and every symbol she had carved into my repairs, and every morning we had stood on opposite sides of a cedar fence with different drinks and different cups, and I understood, sitting in that kitchen, that I was the stupidest man in the territory, and that the woman next door was the most patient person I had ever met. That afternoon, I walked to the fence. She was in her garden, kneeling among her herbs, her green hands in the dark soil, her hair coming loose from its knot. She looked up when she heard me, brown gold eyes, calm and warm and completely unsurprised by whatever expression was on my face, because she was a woman who had been waiting for this moment for 9 months and who recognized it the way a farmer recognizes the first sign of rain after a long drought. "I talked to Tavrik," I said. "I know," she said. "Not, I know you talked to him. Just, I know. As in, I know you finally understand. I have been waiting for you to understand. I am not surprised it took this long." "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. She stood up. She brushed the dirt from her knees. She looked at me across the fence with the particular level gaze of a woman who is about to say something she has been holding for a long time. and who was not going to soften it or decorate it, or make it easier to hear. Because in our tradition, we do not explain the choosing, we perform it. The man either sees it or he does not. If he sees it, the choosing is complete. If he does not, the woman waits. And if the waiting takes too long, the woman knows that the man is not the one she thought he was, and she removes the bead, and the choosing ends. How long is too long? You are at 9 months. I was prepared to wait a year. And if I hadn't talked to Tavrik, then I would have given you 3 more months. And if 3 more months produced nothing, I would have untied the bead and stopped baking and stopped waiting. And you would have noticed the absence of all those things and wondered what had changed. And by then, it would have been too late. The calm precision of it was breathtaking. She had not been hoping. She had not been pining. She had been executing a ritual with the methodical patience of a woman who had learned it from her mother and her mother's mother. A ritual that had a timeline and a procedure and a defined endpoint. And she had been willing to reach the endpoint and walk away if the man she had chosen proved unable to see what was in front of him. I see it now, I said. I know, she said. You have the look. What look? The look of a man who has just realized that the answer to a question he has been asking for a very long time was hanging on his kitchen board. Then the ex-wife came. Margot arrived on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, in the particular way that ex-wives arrive when they have heard something through the settlement grapevine and have decided that the appropriate response is a personal visit rather than a letter. She stood on my front porch with her traveling coat and her sharp eyes and the expression of a woman who has come to deliver an opinion and does not intend to leave until it has been received. I heard about the ORC woman, she said. Her name is Bryn. I heard about Bryn. The way she said the name made it sound like a diagnosis rather than an identity. Is it true? Is what true? Are you with her? The ORC woman next door. Is that what this is? I looked at Margot. At the woman I had spent 5 years trying to become the person she wanted me to be, and failing, and watching the failure accumulate between us like snow on a fence line, heavy and cold, and eventually too deep to see over. I looked at her, and I understood, for the first time, that the reason our marriage had failed was not that we pointed in different directions. It was that she had never once looked at me and seen the person I actually was. She had only ever seen the person she wanted me to become, and the distance between those two people was the distance between a marriage and a project, and I had been the project. Yes, I said, I am with her, an ORC. She said the word the way people say words that they consider self-evidently disqualifying. You left me for an ORC. I didn't leave you for anyone, Margot. We left each other. And Bryn is not an ORC the way you're saying it. She is a person, a specific one, who happens to have green skin and who has been more patient with me than I probably deserve. Something in my voice must have communicated what my words were trying to say, because Margot's expression shifted, not toward acceptance, toward the particular, bitter recognition of a woman who has just understood that the man she failed to shape has been shaped by someone else, and that the shaping was not done with force or ambition or the relentless pressure of expectation, but with food left at a door and symbols carved into wood and the quiet daily patience of a woman who says love with her hands. I hope you know what you're doing, she said. I don't, I said, but I know what she's doing, and it's enough. Margot left. I watched her walk down the road and I felt nothing, which was itself a feeling, the particular, clean emptiness of a man who has finally set down a thing he was carrying out of habit rather than necessity, and who discovers that his shoulders can straighten and his lungs can fill, and the world looks different from a height he has not stood at. In years that evening, Bryn appeared at the fence. She had heard. Of course she had heard. The walls between frontier houses are thin, and the words of an ex-wife are loud. She called me the ORC woman, Bryn said, not with hurt, with the flat observational tone of a woman cataloging a fact she has encountered many times before. I know, I said, and I told her you are a person, a specific one. Bryn looked at me across the fence. In the evening light, her olive-green skin was warm, and the brown gold of her eyes held the particular quality of attention that I had been receiving every morning for 9 months, and that I was only now learning to recognize for what it was. "My people have a saying," she said. "When a person is judged by her surface, the judge reveals his own depth. Your ex-wife's depth is shallow, yours is not." She paused. "That is why I chose you." "I didn't deserve the choosing," I said. "Nobody deserves it," she said. "That is not how choosing works. You do not earn it, it arrives. The only question is whether you accept it when it does." I looked at the green bead on the keyring. I looked at the woman across the fence. I looked at the 9 months of mornings and meals and symbols and patience that stretched between that first Saturday afternoon and this Thursday evening. A chain of small gestures that were not small at all, that were in fact the largest thing anyone had ever done for me, delivered so quietly that I had walked through the middle of every day without hearing it. "I accept it," I said. "I know," she said. "You accepted it 9 months ago. You just didn't know the word for it yet." That night, after Margot left, and the dust of her visit had settled into the particular ringing silence that follows a confrontation you did not want, but could not avoid, I went to the fence. The evening light was doing the thing it did in late summer, turning the air gold, and the shadows long and the world quiet in the particular way that the world gets quiet when the day is deciding whether to end. Bryn was in her garden. She was always in her garden in the evenings, kneeling among her herbs, her green hands in the soil, the dark hair coming loose from its knot in the way that it always came loose by evening, a daily undoing that I had watched happen 100 times without ever acknowledging that watching it had become one of the things I looked forward to most about the end of each day. She stood up when she saw me at the fence. She brushed the dirt from her knees, and she came to the fence and stood on her side, and I stood on mine. "This is pretty sick." The good little person, with growth of felt it before she understood its person, and was being made 9 Marillolus. This is not her family. From Myotha may crest the steps to stay away. And between us, the cedar planks that I had planed and oiled and repaired, and that she had carved her symbols into, stood exactly as they had for 9 months, 6 feet tall and permeable in every way that mattered. "I know what the bead means now," I said. "I know you know," she said. "Why did you choose me? Of everyone in this settlement, of every man you could have given the bead to, why me?" She thought about it, not the performative thinking of a person who has the answer ready and is pretending to consider it for the sake of the audience. Real thinking. The kind that takes a moment because the answer is important enough to deserve precision. "Because you fixed things," she said. "Not for money, not for recognition. Because they were broken and you could not walk past a broken thing without wanting to make it work again. That is a quality, a rare one. Most people see broken things and walk past. You see broken things and stop, and you stay until they work." She paused. "And because the first time you came to my door with a key, you did not look at my skin first. You looked at the key. You explained yourself. You treated me as a person who lived in a house that shared a gate with your house. Not as an orc, not as a neighbor to be cautious about, as a person. That was the first moment. Everything after that was confirmation." I looked at the bead on my key ring, which I had been carrying for 9 months, and which I now understood had been speaking to me for 9 months in a voice I did not know how to hear. "I am going to make you a bead," I said. "I know," she said. And the way she said it, the calm, unsurprised certainty of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this sentence for exactly 9 months, and who receives it the way she receives everything, with patience and without drama, was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard, because it meant she had never doubted, not once. Not in 9 months of waiting and feeding and carving and watching me say the right words while looking in the wrong direction. She had known, and she had waited, and the waiting was not passive. The waiting was the strongest thing she had ever done. 3 days later, Bryn's bedroom door broke. The top hinge had been loosening for weeks, the screws pulling out of the old wood frame the way screws do when the wood has dried and the grain has opened, and the structure that used to hold them has lost its grip. She mentioned it over the fence on a Wednesday morning, casually the way she mentioned everything that needed fixing, which was with the absolute confidence that I would fix it. Because fixing things was what I did, and she had long ago stopped treating my repairs as favors and started treating them as facts. I came over that evening with my tool belt and my screwdriver and a set of longer screws that would bite deeper into the frame. The door was in bad shape. The hinge had pulled away far enough that the door dragged on the floor when it swung, and the latch no longer caught, which meant the door would not stay closed, which meant she had been sleeping with an open bedroom door for at least a week without mentioning it, because mentioning things before they became problems was not her style. Her style was to wait until the problem was real, and then present it to me as though the timing were coincidental, when in fact the timing was precise, the careful calibration of a woman who understood that a man who fixes things needs things to fix, and that, giving him things to fix, was her way of keeping the gate between them open. I worked on the door for 40 minutes. I stripped the old screws, filled the holes with dowel plugs and glue, drilled new pilot holes, and set the new hardware with the particular satisfying precision of a job done right the first time. I tested the swing, I tested the latch. The door closed smooth and quiet, and held. I tapped the frame with my knuckle the way I always do when I finish a job, the small, unconscious percussion of a man verifying his own work. Then I turned around. She was standing behind me in the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed and the evening light behind her, and the green of her skin, and the dark of her hair, and the warm brown gold of her eyes were all exactly where I had been seeing them for 9 months. But tonight, I was seeing them differently. Because tonight I knew what the bead meant, and what the symbols meant, and what every morning, and every meal, and every carved word on every repaired surface in her house had been saying. And the knowing changed the looking the way a key changes a lock, not by altering the mechanism, but by fitting it. I grinned at her. The same grin I had grinned a dozen times before, standing in front of a dozen different repairs, in a dozen different rooms of her house. I fix your plumbing, I said. I fix your shelves. Now I'm fixing bedroom doors too. Might as well marry me, Bryn. Save us both the trouble. I said it. The same words, the same joke, the same sentence I had been tossing over my shoulder for 9 months. While I worked, my head down, my hands busy, my attention everywhere except on the face of the woman I was speaking to. But this time I looked up. This time I watched her face while I said it. She was not laughing. She had never been laughing. Not once in all the times I had said it. And the expression on her face, now that I was finally looking at it instead of away from it, was not the expression of a woman hearing a joke. It was the expression of a woman who had been hearing a truth repeated by a man who did not know it was a truth, and who had been waiting with the patience of stone and the certainty of someone who has already made her decision, for the man to stop laughing and start seeing. 1 second, 2 seconds, the longest seconds of my life, standing in the doorway of a room I had just repaired, looking at a woman I had been looking past for 9 months, and who was now finally, fully, completely visible to me. Not her green skin, not her ORC features, her, the person behind all of it. The one who made coffee I had not asked for and left food I had not earned, and carved words I could not read into wood I had fixed with my own hands. She stepped forward. She took my hand. Her green fingers wrapped around my wrist, warm and calloused and certain, the grip of a woman who has spent 9 months reaching for this moment and who is not going to let it pass because the man she is reaching for is finally reaching back. She led me through the doorway I had just repaired, into her bedroom, without a word, because words, in the ORC tradition, are not how you say the thing that matters most. The thing that matters most is said with hands, and her hand was on my wrist, and my feet were following hers, and the door I had fixed closed behind us with the smooth, quiet precision of a thing done right. The bedroom was her world, the part of it she had kept private behind a door that did not close properly, in a room that I had never entered because I had never been invited. The walls were covered with drawings, ORC art, done in charcoal and colored pigment on stretched hide, images of landscapes and people, and the particular angular symbolism that I had been seeing on my repairs for months, but that I now saw in its full context, surrounded by other symbols, embedded in scenes, part of a visual language that was beautiful and complex and completely beyond my ability to read. In the corner, a loom, small, well-made, strung with half-finished weaving that I could see was masterful. She was a weaver I had not known. 9 months of mornings and meals and repairs, and I had not known that the woman next door wove. On the wall above the bed, a single image, larger than the others, 2 figures standing close, one with green skin and one without, their hands joined. Around their joined hands, a cord. On the cord, 2 beads, the ORC marriage image, the Vethlin completed. 2 beads, 1 cord, 1 threshold. Bryn went to the bed. She reached beneath the pillow. She brought out a small wooden box, dark with age, smooth with handling. She opened it. Inside, on a cushion of dark cloth, was a second bead. Glass, deep green, identical to the one she had tied to my keyring 9 months ago. "The first bead is the choosing," she said. Her voice was quiet and steady, and held the particular weight of a woman who has been holding something for a long time, and is now, at last, setting it down. "I gave it to you on the first day. It means, I have chosen you. This," she held up the second bead, "is the staying. It means, I want to remain with you. I have had it ready since the 3rd month. I have been waiting for you to be ready to receive it." She placed the bead in my palm. It was warm from the pillow, warm from her body heat conducted through the fabric, and the box and the warmth of it against my skin felt like the distillation of 9 months of mornings into a single object, small enough to hold in one hand and heavy enough to change a life. "The tradition says the man makes the 3rd step," she said. "He carves a bead of his own, something made with his hands, not bought, not found, made. And he gives it to the woman, and she threads all 3 beads on a single cord, and the cord goes on the door, and the choosing is complete." I looked at the bead in my palm. I looked at the woman who had given it to me. I looked at the room around me, at the drawings on the walls and the loom in the corner, and the image above the bed of 2 figures with joined hands and 3 beads on a cord, and I understood, standing in a room I had never been invited into before tonight, that the invitation was not about the room. It was about everything the room contained. Her art, her weaving, her private world, the one she kept behind the door that did not close properly, the door I had just fixed, the door she had just opened. She had shown me her world, not because I asked, because I was ready. "I'll make the bead," I said. "I know," she said. "You are a man who makes things with his hands. That is why I chose you, because the tradition says the bead must be made, and you are the kind of man who would make it well." I went home that night with 2 beads and a mission, and the particular galvanizing clarity of a man who has been given a task that matters and who intends to do it right. I carved the bead from oak, not any oak, from the fence post between our yards, the one I had replaced last spring, the one she had carved her first symbol into. I cut a small piece from the top of the post, where her mark was still visible, and I worked it with my hands for 3 days. I did not use a lathe. I did not use power tools. I shaped it with a knife and sandpaper, and the patient, repetitive motion of a man who understands that the value of a handmade thing is not in its perfection, but in the evidence of the hands that made it. The bead was not perfect. It was slightly irregular, a little rough at one pull, the grain visible in lines that followed the curve of the wood, the way rivers follow the curve of a valley. It was, in the particular vocabulary of handmade things, honest, the work of a man who had spent his life fixing things built by other people, and who was now, for the first time, building something entirely his own, for a purpose that was entirely personal, from a piece of wood that carried a mark carved by the woman he was building it for. On the 3rd evening, I walked to the fence. Bryn was there. She always seemed to be there when I needed her to be, which was either coincidence or the particular, quiet attentiveness of a woman who had been listening for his footsteps for 9 months and who could identify the sound of his walk from 30 yards away. I held out the bead oak, hand-carved, slightly imperfect, carrying in its grain the mark she had carved into the fence post where the wood came from. She took it, she turned it in her green fingers. She saw the grain, she saw the imperfection. She saw the mark, her own mark, the symbol she had carved into the fence post months ago, now embedded in a bead that a man had carved from the same wood with his own hands. "You used the fence," she said. "The fence is where we started," I said. It seemed right. She closed her fingers around the bead. She held it against her chest, and the expression on her face was the thing I had been looking for, without knowing I was looking for it. The thing that no amount of repaired shelves or fixed plumbing or successful carpentry had ever produced. The thing that was not gratitude and not relief, but recognition. The recognition of a woman seeing in a hand-carved bead made from a shared fence the evidence that the man she had chosen had finally, completely, irreversibly chosen her back. The next morning, she threaded the beads. 3 of them. The first gate bead, the one she had tied to my key ring 9 months ago, which I had removed from the ring and given back to her for this purpose. The second staying bead, the one she had kept under her pillow for 6 months. The third, the oak bead I had carved with her mark in its grain. She threaded them on a single cord of braided leather, green and brown fibers twisted together, and she hung the cord on the gate between our yards. 3 beads, 1 cord, 1 threshold. The fence came down the following week. I took it apart myself, post by post, plank by plank. The cedar boards that had separated our yards for years stacked in a neat pile that I would later use to build a bench for the garden that was now 1 garden instead of 2. Bryn's ORC herbs and my few scraggly human vegetables growing side by side, in soil that did not recognize the line where the fence had been, and that produced, in the shared bed, plants that were healthier and more vigorous than either garden had produced alone. She moved into my house, or I moved into hers, or we moved into the space between, which was the space that had always belonged to both of us, the space where the fence had stood and where the gate had hung, and where 3 beads on a leather cord now dangled from a hook above the threshold, catching the morning light the way the first bead had caught it on my kitchen board for 9 months. Green glass and oak wood turning slowly in the air that moved between 2 homes that were now 1 home. The symbols, the one she had carved into every repair I had made in her house. On the evening after the fence came down and the cord was hung, she took me through her house, room by room, and translated them. The fence board, salam, strong, reliable, will hold. The shelf bracket, gouverneilier, trustworthy, dependable. The pipe fitting, Baslian, the one who nourishes, who feeds. The window frame, sabirli, patient, enduring, willing to wait. The kitchen cabinet, Cecilin, chosen, selected, wanted. The bedroom door, the one I had fixed last, the one she had led me through, Ev, home. I had been repairing her house for 9 months, and for 9 months she had been writing on my repairs, in the language I could not read, a description of the man she saw in me. Each symbol was a word. Each word was a declaration. And the house, taken together, was a love letter written in ORC on human carpentry, visible to anyone who could read it and invisible to the one person it was addressed to. Until now. Until this evening, standing in the kitchen of a house that was now our house, reading the words she had been writing about me since the day I walked a spare key to her doorstep, and she tied a green bead to the ring without asking if it was all right. "You wrote on my repairs," I said. "I wrote on you," she said. "Every word is about you. Every mark is something I saw in you that you did not see in yourself. Strong, trustworthy, patient, nourishing, chosen." She paused. "Home." I looked at the bedroom door, at the word carved into the frame. Ev, home. The last word. The word she had placed on the last thing I fixed, on the night she led me through the doorway into her room, and showed me the world she had been keeping for me behind a door that would not close. I used to think love had to begin with a moment you could not possibly miss. Lightning, a racing heartbeat. Some signs so obvious it never needed to be questioned twice. But Bryn and I started with a spare key cut for a shared gate and 15 quiet minutes of tea and coffee over a fence every single morning. With a joke, I said, without ever looking up. Well, I said it. With the patient, quiet timing of someone waiting for me, not to fix something broken in her house, but to actually see her plainly for who she was. Slow love is not less dramatic than the other kind. It is just the sort of thing you only ever recognize once you are far enough along to look back at it clearly. Once enough mornings have stacked up behind you that the pattern finally becomes visible instead of just felt. The green bead is still on the cord. The oak bead is still beside it. The third bead, the staying bead, hangs between them, and the cord turns slowly in the air above the threshold of a house that has no fence anymore, no division, no line between his side and her side. Just one garden where orc herbs and human flowers grow together in soil that does not care who planted what. I said the line without looking up. Might as well marry me, Bryn. I said it laughing. Twice, standing in her laundry room and standing at her bedroom door. If I had looked up right then, I would have seen that she was not laughing back either time. Maybe things would have started sooner if I had, but maybe we needed exactly that much time between us so I could stop being afraid of what I actually wanted, and so she would not have to keep waiting alone for something she was not yet ready to say out loud in a language I could understand. Sometimes a person is right there next to you the whole time, across a fence, over a morning cup of coffee, in every small repair, in every carved symbol, and every bead tied to a key ring without asking, telling you everything except in actual words. The only real question is how long it takes you to finally look up and see it for what it is, and whether, when you finally do, you are brave enough to say something back. That rare eyes, white hair, white hair, white hair. The times of this was essentially what I knew. White, rare, growth. And dirt is essential. But I am not a brave. The brave is made by the angry man. That oak bead still hangs on our door today, right where the morning light finds it first. Bryn says we should replace it with something finer. I always tell her no. Some things you do not hold on to because they are still new or because they are still perfect. You hold on to them because they remind you of the exact moment you started paying attention. And the symbols on the walls, the ones she carved into every repair I ever made in her house, they are still there too. I will never sand them off. I will never paint over them. They are the first words anyone ever wrote about me that were true, and they were written in a language I did not speak by a woman who waited 9 months for me to learn to read them. Strong, trustworthy, patient, chosen. Home. She was right. She was right about all of them. If this story has stayed with you, subscribe to Orc Tears so you do not miss the ones still coming. Leave a like and tell me in the comments. Which moment? The green bead on the key ring. 15 minutes of mourning over a fence. The symbols carved into every repair. Might as well marry me. The old merchant's smile. She has been saying it with her hands for months. The ex-wife at the door. I chose you because you make things with your hands. The oak bead carved from the fence. 3 beads, 1 cord, 1 threshold. The fence coming down. Or, the symbols translated, strong, trustworthy, patient, chosen, home. Drop your answer below, because somewhere tonight, someone is standing on one side of a fence with a cup in their hand, and on the other side, someone with patient hands and a quiet heart is waiting for them to look up. Look up. The answer has been there the whole time. You just have to learn to read it.